Hi, everybody. It's going to be a short video this week because I think I said most of what I wanted to about literature in the last module. But if you have questions, if there's something you would like me to talk about or talk more about, please let me know because that would really help me. Sometimes I think of things I want to say and then I forget about them. So even hearing ideas would help me remember and help me realize, oh, yeah, I should talk about that. And I want, so here, just sort of briefly, to talk about some things I know I've talked about before, and that is how vital independent reading is. That is one reason I chose the Jared Amato book for this course. There's actually several books I considered. I'm going to share some other good books in this video, which is really the main point for me in making this video. I cannot say enough how important independent, self-selected reading is for learners. Now, I personally think it's possible to take that too far. And as I've mentioned before, when I taught, although my students always had self-selected independent reading, we also read the same thing. We read class novels and we read from the literature anthologies. It's important, I think, for those experiences too. I think it's important for an educated individual to have a background of shared experiences that might not be universal anymore, but that at least some other people have encountered. So while maybe not everyone reads Animal Farm in high school, it's great if many people do. Maybe not everyone reads Night in high school or To Kill a Mockingbird, but it's great that many people do. And so, as I mentioned, I would often alternate between sort of classic works like those and works of young adult literature, some of which are classics and some of which frankly aren't. So, when I taught middle school, I taught The Outsiders, which is a classic. But I mentioned I also taught, I think I mentioned I taught to ninth graders Sleeping Freshmen Never Lie, which is definitely not a classic. It's just a fun book. Um, so I don't think independent reading should be the only thing done. And I think if we do that, I think that some teachers are really effective doing that, but I think they are a tiny minority. Um, it's important that students get a chance to choose books and read them themselves because no matter how much no matter how well students read and no matter how much instructional time you may end up spending on reading, and for that matter, in terms of teaching literature, no matter how much time you may spend on teaching students the elements of literature, it's meaningless if students never apply it. I am involved in some training right now that Minnesota wants college professors in education to do about the science of reading. You have likely heard about the science of reading. We'll talk about it a little in this course as well. And that's all well and good. But if there's not opportunities to read, it doesn't matter. We have to give our students opportunities to read and we have to advocate for those opportunities. Luckily, I think the standards are still broad enough that we can do that. Like we can tie independent reading activities to standards. So it's important. Please advocate for it. Hopefully, you're getting that from the Jared Amato book. There's several other books that I want to mention that I would encourage you to consider reading at some point. One of them is a book that I considered adopting for this class. I actually use it for a class I teach elsewhere for specific to middle school reading. Although it's not specific to middle school, this book. I didn't. I chose not to use it because it is now getting to be an older book. In fact, I probably won't use it again in my other class because it is now getting to be more than 10 years old, and so it's a little bit out of date. It's also maybe out of print, but you can still find it on Amazon. There's also a Kindle version. This is by Kelly Gallagher, who has written a lot in English language arts education, and it's called Redecide, and it is essentially about the assault on independent self-selected reading that has occurred since the early 21st century. It is a call to arms for teachers and potentially parents and guardians. I think it's a great book. I think it is a sobering book. And so the course I teach it for is a combination undergraduate and graduate course, and about half of the students in it are currently teaching, sometimes on a provisional license. And so it's really interesting to get their experiences because for some of them, they say, this is not what I see in my school. We are letting our students read, we are encouraging it. And that's awesome. But I also see just the opposite. So it's a great book. It is useful. It is for practitioners, right? It's not a textbook. It's awesome. I encourage you to check it out. Another one that is super old now. I used this book when I took a course in developing literacy, grades 4 through 12, when I was um, in between. It was sort of my last semester as an undergraduate, first semester of a graduate sort of thing. So it is. It's quite old now. It is dated. It is also out of print, I think, although you can find it on Amazon. Um, for me, this was such a foundational text that I share it whenever I teach a language arts class. Um, it is it was a book that was sort of aspirational for me. I never taught like Linda Reef did, but she inspired me. And she was much more focused on independent reading than I was. Um, but she too did said, "Oh yeah, sometimes we read the same thing," but that was I think pretty rare in her class, and it was not rare in my class. Um, it was very honest, which I think is nice for books like this that sometimes are sort of an ideal classroom. And she spoke really a little bit about why she didn't focus too much on that, on the struggles. But she said, yeah, this doesn't work for every student. I had students who I really struggled with, but I also had students who, even though they were reading wildly different things, were still growing as readers. It's a lovely book if you can find it inexpensively. Right now, the used copies are pretty expensive on Amazon, so I wouldn't recommend you buy it that much because again, it's from the '90s. Um, but it is still aspirational. Obviously, it's before the standards movement and it's before the widespread use of technology, right? This is pre smartphones. It's not quite pre internet, but it might as well be pre internet. I doubt she had internet in her classroom when she wrote this book, let me put it that way. But at its core, it's really good about both reading and writing and the importance of writer's workshop and things like that. It's a great book. Her experience was predominantly in middle school, but the ideas are applicable at other levels. And then the final book is actually the most recent one, and I read this book on the recommendation of Professor Hoffman, who retired from DSU last year. You may have been fortunate enough to have her as a professor, maybe not, but Professor Hoffman was one of my closest friends when I taught full time at DSU, and we had some. Although we differed on some things, we also had very similar ideas about the importance of literature. And so this was a book that she recommended. It has been used at times in districts around North Dakota called The Book Whisperer. And it is a little bit more, I felt, geared towards elementary, but its author is a sixth grade teacher. And I believe she's a sixth grade teacher with an elementary background as opposed to a secondary background, but I might be wrong. But I still think the ideas in here are really appropriate, especially for middle school, but also for high school as well. And it's again an important um, I both an important call to action of the importance of independent reading as well as what she did. And one of the keys for her is how important it is for us as teachers to keep up to date with young adult literature, or with literature in general, because one of the things that she could do is to match a book with a student. Because we know that if we're starting independent reading, one of the hardest things to do sometimes, especially for a student who, maybe isn't an avid reader, is to find a book that is going to reach that student. And in a part, that's what this book is about. And I think it's worthwhile because of that. It's also worthwhile for all of us to keep reading widely, including sometimes in genres we wouldn't normally read, to be able to recommend books for our students. So, um, yeah, it's important. So these are three books. This one is the most available of the three. It's also the most recent. Um, I encourage you to take a look for them as you grow your professional libraries. I think they're worthwhile. And another part of independent reading I should also point out is that it is important for you as well to model it for your students. You should be a reader, and hopefully you are a reader if you're teaching English. Sometimes when I teach elementary majors, they aren't readers. They don't particularly care for reading. My professors back in the day would have probably encouraged them strongly to get out of the program in that case. We don't do that anymore because of various reasons, but it's important that you're a reader and that you can talk to your students about books that you're reading. Now, obviously, if you're reading entirely inappropriate books, that's fine. You're not going to talk about those two with your students, but read things that you can talk about your students with. Now, by that I mean, right, you might read a professional book. You might read Readaside and be reading that and say, oh, I'm reading this book. It's for me as a teacher, but here's something I found interesting in it. Here's something that the author did that I thought was really, really different or really good or really bad. It's okay to talk about books you don't like. And it's okay, of course, to have students realize that they don't have to finish a self-selected book. Sometimes the book is just not for them. And that's an important lesson. And it's sort of a metacognitive skill to judge, is this something I should stick with and power through because it's going to get better? Or do I know right away this is not for me? It's kind of almost like we sometimes talk about this with TV shows now. Um, I was talking about a TV show with friends just a couple of days ago, and I said, the first few episodes aren't that good, but it gets really good afterwards. And that's true for various TV shows through the years, and it can be true for books too. Sometimes, right? The first couple chapters are not those were rough going. And if you know the book, you can tell that to a student. You can say, you might find the first two chapters really dry, but it gets really exciting after that. So anyway, know books, read about books, talk about books. If students aren't reading, like, what's the point? I mean, what's the point? And the same thing is true for writing. I mean, right? If students aren't writing, students also need time to write about things that matter to them. But here we're talking about literature and reading. So if you have questions, if you have ideas that you want me to talk about, let me know. Thanks for watching.